The security camera captured it all in brutal clarity. CEO Victor Townsend stood over 24-year-old analyst Marcus Wright, who sat trembling in his chair, tears streaming down his face, his hand instinctively covering his completely bald head. What kind of professional shows up looking like that? You think clients want to see someone who looks like they're dying? Victor's voice boomed through the open-plan office as dozens of employees froze at their desks. Marcus tried to speak, his voice breaking. "Sir, the chemotherapy—" But Victor cut him off. "I don't care what excuse you have. Either wear a hat or don't come back tomorrow." What Victor didn't know was that his executive assistant was recording everything on her phone, and by nightfall, his 30-year career would lie in ruins, his company in revolt, and his reputation destroyed across the business world. Where are you watching from today? If this story resonates with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments where you're joining us from. Victor Townsend had built Pinnacle Solutions from a small tech consultancy into a $300 million company over 3 decades. At 58 years old, he had become accustomed to people following his orders without question. His corner office on the 40th floor of the gleaming Pinnacle Tower in downtown Chicago offered panoramic views of Lake Michigan, a fitting throne for a man who saw himself as business royalty. The morning had started like any other. Victor arrived at 7:30 sharp in his custom Tesla, nodded curtly at the security guard, and took his private elevator to the executive floor. His first meeting was a quarterly performance review with the analytics team, a department that had recently missed several key deadlines. "I want explanations, not excuses," Victor barked as he strode into the conference room, not bothering with pleasantries. The team of 8 analysts sat nervously around the table, spreadsheets and reports laid out before them. Among them was Marcus Wright, newly returned to work after 6 weeks of absence. Marcus had been with Pinnacle for just 2 years, but had quickly proven himself as a brilliant data analyst with an extraordinary talent for spotting market trends. Victor had personally praised his work several times before, back when Marcus had a full head of thick brown hair and didn't need to take breaks to manage his nausea. "Let's start with the Richardson account," Victor said, scanning the room. His eyes fell on Marcus, who looked noticeably different. "Right. What happened with their quarterly analysis?" Marcus cleared his throat. "Sir, I've prepared the full report here," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "We identified 3 key areas where they're losing market share and developed a strategy to—" "Why is it 2 weeks late?" Victor interrupted, not opening the folder. "I apologize for the delay, sir," Marcus said quietly. "I was undergoing treatment and tried to work remotely, but there were complications that—" "Treatment? For what, laziness?" Victor scoffed. "Everyone has problems, right? The difference is professionals don't let their personal issues affect their work." A painful silence fell over the conference room. Marcus's colleagues stared at their notebooks, uncomfortable and embarrassed for him. Sarah Chen, the executive assistant who had followed Victor into the meeting to take notes, looked up from her tablet, her expression shifting from shock to disgust. "Sir," Marcus tried again, his voice steady despite the obvious effort. "I was diagnosed with stage 3 lymphoma 2 months ago. The treatment has been aggressive, but I'm committed to maintaining my responsibilities here." Victor waved his hand dismissively. "Save the sob story. I need results, not excuses. If you can't handle the work, maybe you should consider a less demanding position." The meeting continued, with Victor tearing apart each presentation and dismissing every explanation. Marcus remained silent, focusing on taking notes with hands that occasionally trembled from the medication still working its way through his system. As the team filed out an hour later, Victor called out, "Right, stay behind." Once they were alone, with only Sarah still present in the corner, Victor's demeanor shifted from merely dismissive to openly hostile. "What's with the new look?" he asked, gesturing to Marcus's bald head. "Is this some kind of fashion statement?" Marcus straightened in his chair. "No, sir, it's a side effect of the chemotherapy. My doctor says the hair loss is temporary." "Well, it looks unprofessional," Victor said, leaning against the conference table. "Our clients expect a certain image, and frankly, you look sick. It makes people uncomfortable." "I understand your concern about the company's image," Marcus replied, maintaining his composure, though his eyes betrayed his hurt. "I can start wearing a cap if that would be preferable." "A cap? This isn't a baseball game," Victor scoffed. "Listen, I don't know why you think your personal problems should become everyone else's. My sister had cancer last year, and she still made it to her daughter's wedding looking presentable. She wore a wig, for God's sake." Marcus's professional facade began to crack. "Sir, I've been working through nights of fever and pain to complete these reports. I've never once missed a deadline before my diagnosis, and I'm doing everything humanly possible." "That's the problem, isn't it?" Victor interrupted, his voice rising. "We don't need humanly possible here. We need excellence. Pinnacle doesn't carry dead weight, no matter how sympathetic the story." Sarah watched from her corner, her hand slowly reaching for her phone. Without drawing attention, she opened the camera app and began recording. "Now, I've invested in your development here," Victor continued, pacing around the conference table. "But I'm starting to think that was a bad investment. Looking at you now, I have to wonder what client would want to work with someone who looks like they might not be around to finish the project." At this, Marcus finally broke. Tears welled up in his eyes and began streaming down his face. "I'm fighting for my life," he whispered. "And I'm fighting for this company's future," Victor shot back, unmoved by the young man's tears. "What kind of professional shows up looking like that? You think clients want to see someone who looks like they're dying?" Marcus tried to speak, his voice breaking. "Sir, the chemotherapy—" But Victor cut him off. "I don't care what excuse you have. Either wear a hat or don't come back tomorrow." Marcus sat there trembling, one hand instinctively covering his bare head, as if to protect himself from Victor's verbal assault. The security camera in the corner of the room silently recorded the entire exchange, its red light blinking indifferently. What Victor didn't notice was Sarah, her phone steady in her hand, capturing every word, every cruel gesture, every moment of Marcus's humiliation. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality, but her knuckles were white around her phone. As Marcus gathered his papers with shaking hands and left the conference room, Victor turned to Sarah. "Make a note to HR about possible performance issues with Wright and schedule interviews for his position, just in case." Sarah nodded without a word, her phone now discreetly tucked away in her pocket. The video took less than an hour to reach the entire staff. Sarah had originally sent it only to Diane Forrester, the head of human resources, with a formal complaint attached. But Diane, horrified by what she witnessed, shared it with the company's general counsel, Jeremy Patterson. "This is beyond a simple HR violation," Jeremy said, his face grim as they rewatched the video in Diane's office. "This is discrimination, harassment, and potentially a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. We could be looking at a major lawsuit." "What do you recommend?" Diane asked, still shaken by the footage. "We need to act immediately," Jeremy replied. "I'm going to brief the board. This kind of behavior can't be tolerated, not even from the founder." By noon, the video had somehow leaked to the entire company. Employees gathered in small groups, watching with expressions of horror and disgust as their CEO berated a young man fighting cancer. By 1 o'clock, the video had reached social media, first posted anonymously on Twitter with the caption, "Pinnacle Solutions CEO Victor Townsend bullies employee undergoing cancer treatment. Is this leadership?" The post exploded, gathering 10,000 retweets within the first hour. Then 20,000. Then 50,000. At 2:15, Victor's phone began ringing incessantly. First it was Jeremy from legal, then Diane from HR, then board members, one after another. By 3 o'clock, major news outlets had picked up the story, with headlines flashing across business channels. "Tech CEO caught on camera berating cancer patient employee." Victor sat in his office, blinds drawn, watching his world collapse in real time on the screens before him. His assistant had not returned from lunch. His calls to the PR team went straight to voicemail, and outside his door, he could hear the whispers of staff members walking past. At 4:30, his private line rang. It was Charles Whitmore, the chairman of the board. "Victor, we've called an emergency board meeting," Charles said, his voice grave. "The video is everywhere. 3 major clients have already called to express their concerns, and we're hearing that several more are considering terminating their contracts." "Charles, this is being blown completely out of proportion," Victor insisted. "Wright has been underperforming for months. This had nothing to do with his condition." "The video tells a different story, Victor," Charles replied coldly. "You explicitly mocked his appearance due to cancer treatment. You told him he looks like he's dying." "There's no spinning this. So what are you saying?" Victor demanded, though he already knew the answer. "The board has voted unanimously. We're invoking the moral conduct clause in your contract. You're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out within the hour." Victor slammed the phone down, his hands shaking with rage. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Not after all he'd built. He opened his email to find hundreds of unread messages, many from industry contacts already distancing themselves. One from the National Business Leadership Council informed him that his upcoming keynote speech had been cancelled. Another from the Tech Innovation Board notified him of his removal from their advisory panel. As he scrolled through the cascade of professional relationships disintegrating before his eyes, a knock came at his door. It was the head of security, flanked by two officers. "Mr. Townsend," the security chief said stiffly, "I've been instructed to escort you from the building. You're allowed to take personal items only." Victor looked around the office he had occupied for 15 years, at the awards on the walls, the photos with celebrities and politicians, the view he had been so proud of. All of it, slipping away in an instant. "This is my company," he said, his voice hollow. "You can't just throw me out." "Not anymore, sir," the security chief replied. "Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." As Victor was led through the open office space, employees turned away, avoiding eye contact. The walk of shame felt interminable, each step a reminder of his spectacular fall. The executive elevator, once his private domain, now felt like a cage descending into hell. In the lobby, a small group of reporters had already gathered, alerted by anonymous tips from within the company. Camera flashes exploded as Victor emerged, his security escort trying to shield him from the barrage of questions. "Mr. Townsend, do you regret your comments to Marcus Wright? Is it true the board has fired you? What do you say to cancer patients watching this video?" Victor pushed past them without comment, his face ashen, and climbed into the back of a waiting car. As they pulled away from the curb, he glanced back at Pinnacle Tower, the empire he had built and lost in a single day. Meanwhile, on the 22nd floor, Marcus sat in a conference room with Diane from HR, Jeremy from legal, and 3 board members who had rushed to the office when the crisis erupted. "Mr. Wright, on behalf of the entire company, I want to express our deepest apologies," said Elizabeth Kaufman, the newly appointed interim CEO. "What happened to you today was inexcusable and does not reflect the values of Pinnacle Solutions." Marcus looked tired but composed, the emotional storm of the morning having passed. "I never wanted any of this," he said quietly. "I just wanted to do my job." "And you should be able to," Elizabeth assured him. "We're implementing immediate changes to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." Jeremy slid a document across the table. "This is a formal apology from the company, along with a new contract. It includes extended medical leave with full pay, comprehensive coverage of all your treatment costs not covered by insurance, and a significant compensation package for the distress you've experienced." Marcus looked at the document without touching it. "I don't want money," he said. "I want to make sure no one else goes through what I did today." "That's why we're here," Diane explained. "Beyond your individual situation, we're announcing a complete overhaul of our company policies regarding medical accommodations, a mandatory sensitivity training program for all management, and the creation of an employee advocacy office that reports directly to the board." Marcus nodded slowly. "And what about the other employees dealing with health issues? There are at least 7 people I know of who've been afraid to disclose medical conditions because of the culture here." Elizabeth exchanged glances with the board members. "We'd like you to help us identify those individuals so we can make things right. In fact, if you're willing, we'd like you to lead our new employee advocacy initiative once you're well enough." For the first time that day, Marcus smiled. "I'd like that very much." By evening, Pinnacle Solutions had issued a public statement announcing Victor's termination and outlining sweeping changes to company policy. The statement included a personal apology to Marcus and all employees who had suffered under the toxic culture that had been allowed to develop. The story dominated business news, with commentators discussing the broader implications for corporate America. "This is a watershed moment," said one analyst on CNBC. "When a CEO can lose everything in a single day because of how they treat their employees, it sends a powerful message about what kind of leadership is acceptable in today's world." Social media told a similar story. The hashtag #DoctorStandWithMarcus trended worldwide, with cancer survivors sharing their own workplace experiences. By nightfall, a fund for cancer patients facing workplace discrimination had raised over $2 million, inspired by Marcus's story. Victor Townsend watched it all unfold from his penthouse apartment, alone with his thoughts and the remnants of his shattered career. His phone, once constantly buzzing with calls from people seeking his attention, was silent. The few messages that came through were from his attorney, advising him to make no public statements while they assessed the legal damage. What he couldn't see, what no one outside Pinnacle could see, was the cascade of events his actions had set in motion. In boardrooms across the country, executives were holding emergency meetings, reviewing their own policies and practices, terrified of becoming the next Victor Townsend. HR departments were fielding an unprecedented number of accommodation requests as employees who had hidden their health conditions for fear of retribution suddenly felt empowered to speak up. And in hospital oncology departments, cancer patients were sharing Marcus's story with each other, finding new courage to advocate for themselves in their professional lives, even as they fought for their physical survival. Back in his apartment, Victor poured himself a drink, his hands still shaking slightly. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city he had once felt he owned a piece of. From here he could just make out the silhouette of Pinnacle Tower, now lit up against the night sky, continuing on without him. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Rebecca. "Saw the news. We need to talk." It was terse, cold, and foreboding. After 30 years of marriage, Rebecca had stood by him through countless business crises, but this was different. This wasn't a failed product launch or a bad quarter. This was a moral failure that had been broadcast to the world. Victor tossed the phone onto the sofa without replying. He couldn't face her judgment right now, not when the entire world was already condemning him. He took a long drink, feeling the scotch burn down his throat, and wondered how everything had unraveled so quickly. Just this morning, he had been Victor Townsend, CEO and founder of Pinnacle Solutions, respected business leader, invited speaker at industry conferences, member of prestigious boards. Now he was a cautionary tale, a hashtag, a villain in a viral video. The liquor cabinet beckoned, promising temporary oblivion from the crushing weight of his new reality. But as he reached for a second drink, his phone rang again. This time it was his daughter, Claire. "Dad," she said when he answered, her voice tight with emotion. "Tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't say those things to that poor man." Victor closed his eyes. Claire worked as an oncology nurse. Her patients looked like Marcus, bald, exhausted, fighting for their lives. To her, what he had done wasn't just cruel. It was a personal betrayal of everything she stood for. "Claire, you don't understand the pressure I'm under," he began, but she cut him off. "Do you have any idea what it's like to go through chemotherapy?" she asked, her voice rising. "Do you know what it takes for someone like Marcus to get up every morning, drag himself into work despite the nausea, the pain, the exhaustion, just to be treated like he's an inconvenience?" "I made a mistake," Victor said quietly. "No, Dad. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. What you did was reveal who you truly are." There was a painful pause before she added, "I need some time. Please don't call me for a while." The line went dead, leaving Victor staring at his phone. His own daughter couldn't bear to speak to him, and who could blame her? He'd seen the video, seen himself through the world's eyes. The man in that video wasn't someone he recognized. Harsh, unfeeling, cruel to someone clearly suffering. Had he always been that person? Or had he become that person so gradually that he hadn't noticed the transformation? As the night deepened, Victor sat alone in his penthouse, the drink in his hand untouched, wrestling with questions he had never asked himself before. How many other Marcuses had there been over the years? How many employees had he broken with his demanding, unforgiving approach? And at what point had he started seeing people as merely tools for achieving his business objectives, rather than human beings deserving of dignity and compassion? The answers were uncomfortable, forcing him to confront truths about himself he had long avoided. By dawn, he had made no progress toward redemption, but he had at least begun to understand the depth of what he had lost. Not just his company and reputation, but his connection to his own humanity. Meanwhile, across town in a small apartment, Marcus Wright sat on the edge of his bed, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that pervaded every cell in his body. The day's events kept replaying in his mind, the humiliation, the tears, the sudden reversal of fortune when the company leadership had rallied around him. His phone sat beside him, filled with hundreds of messages from colleagues, friends, and strangers who had seen the video. Words of support, encouragement, and outrage on his behalf flooded in faster than he could read them. Stand with Marcus was still trending. But there was one message that stood out from the rest, from a number he didn't recognize. Marcus, this is Dr. Lenora White from Memorial Cancer Center. I saw what happened to you today. My colleagues and I would like to offer our services pro bono for the duration of your treatment. No one fighting cancer should also have to fight for basic dignity. Please call us. Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes again, but these were different from the tears he had shed in that conference room. These were tears of gratitude, of feeling seen and valued in a way that transcended his professional identity. He sent a quick reply, thanking Dr. White and promising to call in the morning. Then, despite everything, he smiled. Something good was emerging from the ashes of today's ordeal, not just for him, but potentially for countless others who would no longer have to hide their health struggles for fear of being treated the way Victor had treated him. As Marcus finally drifted off to sleep, the events of the day crystallized into a single thought. Sometimes it takes a moment of profound injustice, captured and shared with the world, to catalyze the change that should have happened long ago. 6 months later, Pinnacle Solutions had transformed under Elizabeth Kaufman's leadership. The company hosted a celebration marking both its new direction and Marcus Wright's return to work, following his final round of treatment. Though still thin and his hair only beginning to grow back in patches, Marcus stood tall as he addressed the assembled employees. When I was at my lowest point, feeling most vulnerable, I learned something important, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. Our true character is revealed not in how we treat those with power, but in how we treat those who are suffering. Today I'm proud to say that Pinnacle is becoming a company where vulnerability isn't punished, but protected. The applause was deafening, a standing ovation that continued as Marcus unveiled the company's new employee support center, named not after himself as had been suggested, but after Sarah Chen, the executive assistant whose courage had sparked a revolution. Sarah, now promoted to Director of Ethics and Compliance, blushed as she joined Marcus on the stage. Sometimes doing the right thing is terrifying, she admitted to the crowd, but I've never once regretted pressing that record button. Some things need to be seen in the clear light of day. As for Victor Townsend, his fall continued long after that fateful day. No company would touch him. His speaking engagements dried up, and his autobiography contract was cancelled. Eventually, he sold his penthouse and retreated from public life, a cautionary tale in business schools about how decades of achievement can be undone by a moment of cruelty captured on camera. But this story isn't about Victor's fall. It's about Marcus's rise, about Sarah's courage, about a company that found its moral compass when forced to look in the mirror. It's about the power of accountability in an age where the truth can no longer be buried or denied. Most of all, it's about the simple truth that real leadership isn't measured by the corner office or the bottom line, but by how we treat each other when it matters most. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join us next week for another true story of courage in the face of injustice. Thank you for watching. 1 year after the video that changed everything, Pinnacle Solutions hosted its annual charity gala with a new focus: supporting cancer patients facing workplace discrimination. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton buzzed with energy as employees, clients, and community leaders gathered to celebrate both the company's record-breaking year and its radical transformation. Marcus Wright, now 35 pounds heavier and with a full head of dark curls, stood at the podium as the evening's keynote speaker. His position as Director of Employee Advocacy had evolved into something far more influential than anyone had anticipated. When I look around this room, Marcus began, adjusting the microphone, I see the face of corporate America as it should be, not defined by quarterly profits alone, but by how we uplift each other through our darkest hours. The audience included CEOs from 12 major corporations who had adopted what was now known as the Pinnacle Protocol, a comprehensive framework for supporting employees through serious health challenges without sacrificing business performance. Our employee retention has increased by 78%, Marcus continued. Our productivity metrics have improved by 32%, and perhaps most telling, applications to work at Pinnacle have increased 5-fold. He paused, allowing the statistics to sink in. It turns out that treating people with dignity isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. In the front row, Elizabeth Kaufman, now permanently installed as CEO after the board unanimously voted to extend her contract, nodded in agreement. Under her leadership, Pinnacle had not only recovered from the scandal, but had thrived, with 3 consecutive quarters of record growth. Sarah Chen, sitting beside Elizabeth, beamed with pride. Her promotion to Director of Ethics and Compliance had been just the beginning. She now led a department of 15 people dedicated to ensuring that the company's moral compass never again lost its direction. Sarah, Marcus said, turning to acknowledge her, taught us all that courage isn't about having power. It's about doing what's right when it would be easier to remain silent. Tonight, I'm honored to announce the Sarah Chen Whistleblower Protection Fund, with an initial endowment of $5 million to support those who risk everything to stand up for basic human dignity in the workplace. The applause was thunderous as Sarah, overcome with emotion, made her way to the stage. The woman who had once been just an assistant now stood as a symbol of ethical leadership across the industry. "I never set out to be a hero," Sarah said when the applause finally died down. "I just couldn't watch someone suffer when I had the power to do something about it. That's not heroism. That's humanity." As the evening proceeded, videos played on screens around the room, showing the stories of employees from companies across America who had benefited from the new workplace policies inspired by what had happened at Pinnacle. Cancer patients who received full support during treatment. Caregivers who were given flexible schedules to support ill family members. Veterans with PTSD who found understanding rather than judgment. What no one saw, however, was Victor Townsend, watching the live stream of the event from a modest apartment in Phoenix. His once imposing figure had diminished, his designer suits replaced by casual clothes that no longer needed to project power. The bottle of scotch beside his laptop remained untouched, a small victory in his daily battle against the depression that had followed his downfall. Victor had lost everything: his company, his reputation, his friends, even his marriage. The video had followed him everywhere, making reinvention impossible. Job applications went unanswered. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid him. The isolation had been nearly unbearable, but tonight was different. As he watched Marcus speak with confidence and compassion, something shifted in Victor's perspective. For the first time, he saw beyond his own pain to recognize the positive change that had emerged from his disgrace. The phone beside him rang, startling him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed a name he hadn't seen in months: Charles Whitmore, the former chairman of Pinnacle's board and the man who had fired him. "Charles," Victor answered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Why are you calling?" "I'm watching the gala," Charles replied without preamble. "Are you seeing this?" "Yes," Victor admitted. "They've done well without me." "They've done well because of what they learned from your mistakes," Charles corrected him. "Listen, Victor, I didn't call to rub salt in the wound. I called because I've been thinking about something Marcus said in his Harvard Business Review interview last month." Victor winced. He hadn't read it. Couldn't bring himself to. He said that if we truly believe in redemption in corporate America, we need to create pathways for those who have failed spectacularly to contribute again, provided they've done the work to change. A long silence hung between them. "Why are you telling me this?" Victor finally asked. "Because I'm on the board of a non-profit now, the Corporate Responsibility Initiative. We're looking for someone who understands firsthand the consequences of toxic leadership to help develop our executive training program." Victor felt his heart rate quicken. "And you thought of me? After everything?" "It's not a CEO position," Charles warned. "It's barely a salary, but it's a chance to use your experience to ensure other leaders don't make your mistakes. A chance to be part of the solution." 2 months later, Victor Townsend stood before a room of 20 executive trainees at the Corporate Responsibility Initiative's headquarters. His hands trembled slightly as he clicked to the first slide of his presentation. "My name is Victor Townsend," he began, his voice lacking its former bravado. "And I'm going to show you a video of the worst moment of my life." The room fell silent as the now infamous footage played. Many of the executives had seen it before, but watching it with its subject standing before them lent it a new, uncomfortable power. When the video ended, Victor took a deep breath. "5 years ago, if you had told me that I would lose everything because of how I treated an employee, I would have laughed in your face. I was untouchable, irreplaceable." He shook his head slowly. "I was wrong." Over the next 3 hours, Victor dissected his own behavior with brutal honesty. The entitlement, the lack of empathy, the prioritization of results over people, and outlined the early warning signs that executives should recognize in themselves. "Power doesn't corrupt," he told them. "It reveals. It shows who you truly are when consequences seem remote. My actions that day didn't come from nowhere. They were the culmination of thousands of smaller moments where I chose expedience over empathy, where I saw people as resources rather than human beings. After the session, a young woman approached him. "Mr. Townsend, that was incredibly powerful," she said. "But I have to ask, have you ever apologized to him, to Marcus?" Victor's expression clouded. "No," he admitted. "My attorneys advised against it during the lawsuits, and afterward, I guess I told myself it was too late. That he wouldn't want to hear from me." "With respect, sir," she replied, "that sounds like it's more about protecting yourself than doing what's right." The words stayed with Victor long after the session ended. That night, in his hotel room, he opened his laptop and began typing an email to Marcus Wright. He deleted it 3 times before finally hitting send, with no expectation of a response. To his shock, a reply came the next morning. "Victor, thank you for reaching out. I've been following your work with the Corporate Responsibility Initiative. It can't be easy to use your own failure as a teaching tool, and I respect the courage that takes. I'm in Chicago next Thursday for a conference. If you'd like to meet for coffee, I'd be open to that." Marcus. The following Thursday, at a quiet coffee shop far from Pinnacle Tower, 2 men who had once been symbols, one of cruelty, one of resilience, met as simply human beings. The conversation was neither easy nor comfortable, but it was honest. "I want you to know," Victor said after they had exchanged awkward pleasantries, "that not a day goes by that I don't regret what I did to you. Not because of what it cost me, but because of the pain I caused you at the worst possible time in your life." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "I believe you," he finally said. "But I'm curious. What do you think led you to that point? You weren't always that person, were you?" Victor considered the question carefully. "I think I stopped seeing people as people. Somewhere along the way, employees became obstacles or tools, problems to solve or resources to deploy." He stirred his coffee absently. "Success isolated me. Each promotion, each million in revenue convinced me that my worth as a human being was tied to my productivity, and I projected that onto everyone around me." Marcus nodded. "That's what we're trying to change at Pinnacle now. The idea that our humanity is secondary to our output." "You're doing important work," Victor acknowledged. "More important than anything I accomplished in 30 years of chasing the wrong metrics." As they parted ways an hour later, Marcus offered his hand. "I can't say I forgive you entirely," he said candidly, "but I do believe people can change. The fact that you're using your experience to prevent others from making the same mistakes, that matters." Victor took his hand, fighting back unexpected emotion. "Thank you for meeting with me. It's more than I deserved." "Maybe," Marcus replied, "but deserving isn't always the point. Sometimes it's about what helps us all move forward." The meeting with Marcus marked a turning point for Victor. For the first time since his downfall, he felt a flicker of purpose beyond mere survival. The Corporate Responsibility Initiative work expanded, with Victor developing a curriculum specifically focused on empathetic leadership during health crises. His seminars began attracting attention, not for the scandal that had brought him there, but for the frank, unflinching way he addressed the toxic aspects of traditional corporate culture. He didn't shy away from his own story. In fact, he used it as the centerpiece of every presentation, ensuring that no one who heard him speak could forget the human cost of failed leadership. 6 months into his new role, Victor received an unexpected invitation. Elizabeth Kaufman wanted him to speak at Pinnacle's leadership retreat. The email explained that while many in the company still harbored negative feelings toward him, they believed his perspective could be valuable as they continued to build their new culture. Victor's immediate instinct was to decline. The thought of walking back into the world he had once ruled, now as a cautionary tale, was almost unbearably painful. But then he remembered what Marcus had said. Sometimes it's about what helps us all move forward. So on a crisp autumn morning, Victor found himself standing in the lobby of the same hotel where, 18 months earlier, Pinnacle had held its charity gala. He felt naked without the trappings of power he once carried: the expensive watch, the tailored suit, the executive assistant clearing his path. Now he clutched a simple portfolio containing his notes and waited like everyone else. "Mr. Townsend?" He turned to find Sarah Chen standing beside him. She looked different, more confident, her posture straight, her eyes direct. "Miss Chen," he said, extending his hand, "I wasn't sure I'd see you here." "I'm introducing you," she replied, shaking his hand briefly. "It was my idea to invite you." Victor's surprise must have shown on his face because Sarah continued, "Not everyone agreed with me, but I thought it was important for our leadership team to hear directly from you, especially the new hires who weren't there that day." Before Victor could respond, she added, "I want to be clear about something. I don't regret recording you. I would do it again in a heartbeat." "I wouldn't expect you to regret it," Victor said quietly. "What I did was wrong. What you did was brave." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Thank you for saying that, and thank you for coming today. I know it can't be easy." An hour later, Victor stood at the podium facing a room of 60 Pinnacle executives. The tension was palpable. Some faces openly hostile, others merely curious, a few sympathetic. Elizabeth Kaufman sat in the front row, her expression neutral but attentive. "2 years ago," Victor began, "I stood in a conference room at Pinnacle Tower and revealed the worst version of myself to the world. I humiliated a young man fighting cancer. I prioritized an arbitrary standard of professionalism over basic human decency, and I paid a devastating price for it, as I should have." He paused, looking out at the faces before him. But the truth is that moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of a leadership philosophy that valued results over people, that confused toughness with effectiveness, that measured worth solely in terms of productivity. And the most dangerous thing about that philosophy is how reasonable it sounds, how easily it can be justified in the name of shareholder value or market competition. For the next 45 minutes, Victor laid bare the toxic aspects of his former leadership style, connecting them to broader cultural problems in corporate America. He didn't ask for sympathy or forgiveness. Instead, he offered a stark warning about how power can distort perspective when left unchecked by empathy and humility. "The irony," he concluded, "is that in losing everything, I finally learned what real leadership should look like. It took Marcus Wright, fighting for his life while enduring my cruelty, to show me the courage I lacked. It took Sarah Chen, risking her job to stand up for what was right, to show me the integrity I had lost. And it took all of you, rebuilding this company on a foundation of dignity and respect, to show me that success never required the sacrifice of our humanity." The applause that followed was restrained, but genuine. As Victor stepped away from the podium, Elizabeth Kaufman took his place. "Thank you, Victor," she said, addressing him directly before turning to the audience. "I want us to consider something important today. It would be easy to distance ourselves entirely from what happened 2 years ago, to think of it as just one man's failure, not a symptom of a deeper cultural problem. But the truth is, many of us who were here then didn't speak up when we saw warning signs. We prioritized our own security over doing what was right." She gestured toward Victor, who had taken a seat at the side of the stage. "Victor has had the courage to own his mistakes publicly. Now we need the courage to admit that what allowed those mistakes to happen was a culture that all of us either participated in or failed to challenge. That's why today isn't about blaming one person. It's about committing to a different way forward, together." As the session ended and executives filed out for a break, several approached Victor. Some simply wanted to shake his hand. Others shared their own stories of moments when they had prioritized results over people and regretted it later. A few even thanked him for his honesty. It wasn't redemption, not exactly, but it was something Victor hadn't expected. A chance to transform his greatest failure into something that might help others avoid the same fate. During lunch, Victor found himself seated across from Dr. Lenora White, the oncologist who had offered pro bono treatment to Marcus after seeing the video. She had since joined Pinnacle's board as part of their commitment to bringing diverse perspectives into leadership. "I have to admit," she said after introducing herself, "I was skeptical about your presence here today. I've seen the damage that toxic leadership can do to vulnerable people, not just emotionally, but physically. Stress impedes healing." Victor nodded, accepting the implicit criticism. "But," she continued, surprising him, "I've also seen how powerful it can be when someone acknowledges harm and works to prevent others from causing similar damage. Your transparency today was unexpected." "Thank you," Victor replied quietly. "Though I don't deserve credit for simply telling the truth about my own failings." Dr. White's gaze was penetrating. "Perhaps not. But in my experience, genuine humility is rare enough to be noteworthy when it appears." She paused before adding, "Especially in men who have held significant power." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance to the dining room. Victor looked up to see Marcus Wright entering, surrounded by colleagues who greeted him warmly. His appearance had changed dramatically since their coffee meeting. He looked healthy, confident, his hair now grown into a stylish cut that showed no signs of his previous illness. Marcus spotted Victor, and after a moment's hesitation, made his way across the room. "I didn't know you'd be here today," Victor said, standing to greet him. "Last-minute addition to the agenda," Marcus explained. "I'm leading the afternoon session on inclusive leadership." He glanced at Dr. White. "I see you've met our newest board member." The three of them chatted briefly before Marcus excused himself to prepare for his presentation. As he walked away, Victor felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in Marcus's obvious recovery and success, shame at the memory of how he had treated him, and a bittersweet recognition that his own actions, terrible as they were, had somehow contributed to positive change. "You know, Doctor," White said, interrupting his thoughts, "in medicine we have a concept called harmful pathway to beneficial outcome. It's when a painful or traumatic intervention ultimately leads to healing. I think that might apply here." Victor considered her words carefully. "I appreciate the sentiment, Doctor, but I can't take credit for the good that's come from this situation. That belongs to Marcus, to Sarah, to everyone who had the courage to create something better from the wreckage of my failures." Dr. White smiled slightly. "And that understanding, Mr. Townsend, is perhaps the most important part of your recovery." The afternoon session was led by Marcus, who had developed a comprehensive framework for inclusive leadership that was already being adopted by companies across the country. Victor sat in the back of the room, listening intently as the young man he had once humiliated commanded the respect and attention of everyone present. Marcus's presentation was masterful, blending personal experience with data-driven insights, practical strategies with inspirational vision. He never once mentioned Victor by name, but the shadow of their shared history hung over certain moments, particularly when Marcus discussed the importance of seeing employees as whole human beings rather than just producers of work. "The most powerful question a leader can ask," Marcus told the audience, "is not, 'What can you do for this company?' but, 'What is this company doing to support you?' When people feel genuinely valued as human beings, not just as resources, they bring their full creativity, intelligence, and commitment to their work." The session concluded with a standing ovation. As people filed out, Victor remained seated, reflecting on how much Marcus had grown since their confrontation 2 years ago. The crucible of that experience, combined with his battle against cancer, had forged him into a leader of remarkable depth and wisdom. Victor was about to leave when he noticed Marcus approaching him, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Your speech this morning was compelling," Marcus said, taking the seat beside him. "You didn't try to make excuses. I respected that." "There are no excuses for what I did," Victor replied simply. Marcus nodded, then hesitated before continuing. "I've been thinking about something. The corporate responsibility initiative you're working with. They're doing important work, but their reach is limited. At Pinnacle, we're developing a more comprehensive program on ethical leadership that will be available to companies worldwide. We could use someone with your specific perspective." Victor stared at him, stunned. "Are you offering me a job? At Pinnacle?" "A consulting position," Marcus clarified. "Part-time, project-based. Your name wouldn't be on the materials, at least not initially, but your insights would be valuable." For a moment, Victor couldn't speak. The idea of working with Pinnacle again in any capacity seemed impossible, a line he could never cross. "Why would you want me involved?" he finally asked. "After what I did to you?" Marcus met his gaze directly. "Because you understand the problem from the inside. You've lived both sides of this story. The powerful executive who lost his way, and the disgraced former CEO rebuilding his life. That's a perspective we need if we're going to create something truly meaningful." "I don't know what to say," Victor admitted. "You don't have to decide now," Marcus said, rising. "Think about it. Talk to Elizabeth if you're interested. This isn't about forgiveness, Victor. It's about creating something useful from a painful history." As Marcus walked away, Victor remained seated, overwhelmed by the unexpected offer. It wasn't redemption, not in the sense of erasing his past actions or restoring what he had lost, but it was something perhaps more valuable, an opportunity to transform his greatest failure into a force for positive change. 3 years after the infamous video, Pinnacle Solutions hosted a leadership summit on corporate ethics. The main auditorium was packed, as Elizabeth Kaufman introduced the day's most controversial speaker. "Today's final presenter needs no introduction," she said. "His journey from cautionary tale to advocate for workplace dignity has been both public and profound. While we cannot erase the past, we can learn from it. Please welcome Victor Townsend, now Director of Leadership Ethics at the Corporate Responsibility Initiative." A murmur ran through the crowd as Victor walked onto the stage. Gone was the imperious CEO who had once ruled Pinnacle. In his place stood a humbler man, visibly nervous as he approached the podium. "Thank you for having me," he began. "I know my presence here is difficult for many of you. 3 years ago, I stood in this building as a lesson in how not to lead. Today, I hope to offer something more constructive." In the audience, Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. It had been Sarah who had suggested inviting Victor, despite significant pushback from the board. "Sometimes," she had argued, "the most powerful message is that change is possible, even for those we've written off." As Victor spoke about the transformation of corporate culture, about the measurable benefits of compassionate leadership, about the work still to be done, a larger truth emerged. The story that had begun with cruelty captured on camera had evolved into something more complex, a testament to the possibility of systemic change, of personal redemption, and of a business world slowly learning that its greatest asset was not its profit margins, but its people. When the summit concluded, attendees filed out discussing not just Victor's fall, but his painful public journey toward becoming a different kind of leader. His name would always be associated with that terrible moment, but now it carried an additional message. Even our worst mistakes need not define us completely, if we have the courage to learn from them, the humility to make amends, and the commitment to help others avoid our fate. In the empty auditorium, after everyone had gone, Marcus approached Victor, who was gathering his notes. "That couldn't have been easy," Marcus observed. Victor shook his head. "Easiest thing I've done in years," he replied. The hard part was becoming someone who deserved to be heard again. As they walked together toward the exit, they passed the spot where, 3 years earlier, a security camera had captured a moment of cruelty that changed both their lives forever. Neither man acknowledged it directly, but both felt the weight of that shared history and the unexpected path of growth it had forced them both to travel. Outside, the Chicago skyline stretched toward the clouds, Pinnacle Tower standing among them. No longer just a monument to corporate success, but a symbol of what's possible when we recognize that true leadership begins with seeing the humanity in everyone, especially those we once found it easiest to dismiss. 5 years to the day after the video that changed everything, Marcus Wright stood in the hospital room of a young woman named Sophia Martinez. At 28, she had recently been diagnosed with the same type of lymphoma Marcus had battled. Like him, she was determined to continue working through treatment at her tech company, and like him, she had faced resistance from management. But unlike Marcus's experience, Sophia had resources. The company's HR department had immediately connected her with the Wright Foundation, the non-profit Marcus had established to support employees facing serious health challenges. Now, as part of the foundation's work, Marcus personally mentored patients navigating the complex terrain of treatment and work. "I don't know if I can do this," Sophia admitted, her recently shaved head covered with a colorful scarf. "My team is supportive, but my division director keeps making comments about reliability and optics with clients." Marcus sat beside her bed, his own experience still vivid despite the years that had passed. "I understand," he said gently, "and I want you to know something important. You don't have to be superhuman. Your job right now is to heal. Everything else is secondary." He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. "These are the relevant policies and laws that protect you. Your company has signed the Pinnacle Pledge, which means they've committed to supporting employees through health challenges. If your director continues to create problems, we have a legal team ready to intervene." Sophia looked through the materials, her expression shifting from anxiety to determination. "I just want to do my job," she said. "I'm good at what I do. Being sick doesn't change that." "I know," Marcus replied. "And thanks to policies that exist now that didn't, when I was in your position, you won't have to choose between your health and your career." As they discussed practical strategies for the weeks ahead, a nurse entered the room with Sophia's medication. To Marcus's surprise, it was Claire Townsend, Victor's daughter, whom he had met at several events but had never seen in her professional role. Claire recognized him immediately. "Mr. Wright, she said, extending her hand after setting down the medication tray. "I didn't realize you were visiting one of my patients." "The Foundation tries to reach everyone with similar diagnoses," Marcus explained, then turned to Sophia. "Claire is one of the best oncology nurses in the city. You're in excellent hands." After completing her clinical duties, Claire walked Marcus to the elevator. "Your foundation's work has made a real difference here," she told him. "The resources you provide, the advocacy, it changes the entire experience for patients." Marcus nodded. "That's the goal. No one should have to face what I faced." Claire hesitated before adding, "My father talks about you sometimes, about how you gave him a chance to contribute again, even after everything that happened." "Your father has done important work with the Ethics Initiative," Marcus said carefully. "His perspective has been valuable." "It changed him," Claire said quietly. "What happened between you two? The person he was before, I didn't like him very much, even though he was my father. The person he became afterward, flawed, humbled, trying to do better, that's someone I could reconnect with." The elevator arrived, but Marcus didn't immediately step inside. "I never expected our stories to remain so intertwined," he admitted. "But I've come to believe that sometimes the people who cause harm have an important role to play in healing it, if they're willing to do the difficult work of transformation." Claire smiled. "That's what Dad says too, though not in those exact words. He says you taught him more about leadership than 3 decades in the C-suite ever did." As Marcus finally entered the elevator, he reflected on the strange, painful, ultimately productive connection that had defined the past 5 years of his life. What had begun as a moment of cruelty, captured and shared with the world, had catalyzed changes that now benefited thousands of people like Sophia, not because the moment itself had any inherent value, but because of how people had responded to it. Sarah Chen, with her courage to record and report the abuse. Elizabeth Kaufman, with her commitment to systemic change rather than mere damage control. And yes, even Victor Townsend, who had eventually found the humility to transform his disgrace into a force for good. The elevator doors closed, and Marcus pressed the button for the lobby. He had another patient to visit, another story of vulnerability and resilience to witness. The work continued, not despite what had happened 5 years ago, but because of it. And in that continuity, in the ongoing effort to create workplaces where dignity wasn't a privilege but a right, Marcus found a deeper meaning to his suffering than he could have imagined on that terrible day when a CEO's cruelty had reduced him to tears. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Emma, whom he had met during a speaking engagement 2 years after the incident. "How did it go with Sophia?" she asked. "Good," he replied. "She's scared but fighting, like we all do. Dinner tonight to celebrate the Foundation's anniversary?" "Absolutely. I'll pick up Claire's gift on the way home." Claire, their daughter, now 6 months old, named in a gesture of reconciliation that had moved Victor Townsend to tears when Marcus had told him. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement that healing comes in many forms, sometimes when we least expect it. As Marcus exited the hospital into the bright afternoon light, he looked up at the clear blue sky and took a deep breath. The cancer had been in remission for 4 years now. His hair had grown back, his career had flourished, but more than any of those physical or professional recoveries, he valued the perspective he had gained, the understanding that our most painful moments can, with time and intention, become the foundation for our most meaningful contributions. Somewhere across the city, Victor Townsend was likely giving a presentation to executives about ethical leadership, using his own failure as a teaching tool. Somewhere in Pinnacle Tower, Sarah Chen was ensuring that the company's moral compass remained true. And here, in this moment, Marcus Wright was continuing the work they had all begun on that fateful day when a security camera captured a moment of cruelty that would ultimately lead to something like grace. Not because the cruelty itself had value, but because the response to it revealed the possibility of transformation for individuals, for companies, and for a corporate culture that had too often sacrificed humanity on the altar of profit.